Hey everyone, this is Geronimo, and I am starting a new podcast for DearGays. In this series, we will talk about many of the issues affecting the gay community. You'll laugh, you'll smile, you'll cry. Most important, we'll grow together. I hope you enjoy. Please subscribe. Come along with me on the journey. Dear gays, is it a preference or is it racism? You've heard it before. No Fems, no fats, no blacks, no Asians. DDF, mask for mask only. What is going on? What is going on in our community where we are so brave to put those in the forefront to discriminate, or as some people say, their preferences, or to preference out people so that we can't have relationships with certain people, to seclude ourselves to certain entities? What is going on in our society today? What's going on in the gay community? Before I move on, I want to bring up 4 terms that I want you to think about, and I will revisit these terms. But the first term is preference. Preference is defined as a greater liking for one alternative over another or others. Prejudice, a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. Discrimination, the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. Racism, prejudice, discrimination, antagonism that is directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. I want us to think about those terms as I move on. So while I get into this, I just want to go over just some main events in the gay community that are kind of pivotal to our history, and that these are things that we should never really forget about. One of the first things I want to go over, one of the first events actually, is the Stonewall riots. The Stonewall riots happened in June of 1969 on the 28th. Many people really know about this event, but I just kind of want to go over some facts about it, which is basically the police raided this bar, which is called Stonewall Inn on Christopher Street in New York City. Patrons and other locals within the area got so mad about this because they felt like they're being targeted against or by the police. So they raided into the streets and fought back. They fought these police back. They felt like they were being targeted. Now, it is said that the police were in their right to raid this bar because Stonewall was serving liquor without a license. But again, the gay community felt like they were being targeted unnecessarily, and it wasn't right. After the riot was over that day, there were several days of this demonstrations in New York with other gays, lesbians, bisexuals, drag queens, trans, and other civil rights organizations protesting against the violence against the homosexual community. This riot is regarded as the first major protest on behalf of equal rights for homosexuals. I want to talk about this event just slightly, because one thing that I remember, or actually I just want to point out one major thing. One thing that I know about the gay community is that when it comes to fighting, when it comes to us being in the front and visible, the people who are always in the front and they're always visible are those who are feminine, drag queens, and trans women and or men. And then we have others, of course, that fight along with them, but it's those drag queens and those trans women that are brave enough to fight the battles so they can be who they are, and ultimately it helped win civil rights for us to be who we are today in our society. We owe trans women and drag queens a lot, feminine men, and of course everyone else that fought along with them. But I just want to point out that trans women and drag queens were in the forefronts of fighting. They were part of that fight, so we should never forget them. And they always are. They are always in the front lines. You can't not notice them. Gay men or hypermasculine gay men can hide. We can blend in, but not drag queens and transsexuals or trans women or trans men. They are there in the front fighting the battles for the homosexual community. A second event that happened in 1973 was an arson attack. It happened in the French Quarter, New Orleans, Louisiana. About 32 people died. And it's said that the origin was undetermined, but many people believe there was a gay man that was in this lounge earlier that day who was thrown out of the bar or club or lounge, however they defined it. And I guess he got so mad that he set the place on fire. 32 people died. He later killed himself over a year later in November of 1974. Until the Pulse shooting in Orlando in 2016, this was known as the deadliest attack on a gay club. A third event, the AIDS epidemics that happened in the 80s through the 90s. As many of us know, in the early 80s, many gays started dying suddenly of a sickness that had no name. Many gay men were going to 2, 3, 4 funerals in a week of their friends, burying their friends of the sickness that had no name. Society as a whole did not understand what this was, and eventually what happened was many people saw that it was the gay community being affected by it mostly. So it became known as a gay virus. It was a gay thing. And then, of course, the stigma that came along with being gay was attached to this virus. All the ignorant things, misconceptions, stereotypes, and things of that nature were tagged along with this AIDS epidemic. Nurses didn't want to deliver meals to patients in hospitals because they thought they might contract the virus. People didn't want to hold hands, kiss each other on the cheek, sit on toilets, and many faith communities called those with this virus an abomination. The fourth event I want to bring up is the Orlando nightclub shooting. On June 12th, 2016, after 2:02 a.m., a 29-year-old security guard walked into the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and shot and killed 49 people and wounded 58 others. It was on a Latin night. He was shot and killed later in a police standoff. This was labeled as a terrorist attack and a hate crime. This has been the deadliest incident of violence against the LGBT community in history. All 4 of the events that I just mentioned are interesting because what we learn from these types of tragedies is our communities come together. They come together as one. They come together to fight against powerful evil forces that come to keep us down, that try to separate us. They try to do all those kinds of things. But it seems like it takes a tragedy in order for that to happen. But why? I don't understand why. Even just with other non LGBT related tragedies like 9/11, it seemed like our United States came together to fight as one against evil. No one saw the label of Democrat versus Republican or independent. They just saw us all. We all saw ourselves as Americans, and we rallied behind the flag and we fought as one against evil. Why does it take an event like that? So I want to move on to something else that happened a little bit later. Not too long ago, of course, we all know that gays won the right to marry each other. But for a while, the campaign slogan that came with this to try to win this right to be married was love wins. Love wins. That has a really nice ring to it, doesn't it? I like how that sounds. Love wins. Who can't or doesn't identify with love? Love. Love is something that inherently we all have for ourselves, we have for others. It sees no colors, no sexuality, no distinction. It's just love. How can anyone block another human being from loving and from loving another person? You know, when you put it that way, it sounds great, right? But I don't know about that, you know? So I love how it sounds and it is great. But when I think about this, I think about something that RuPaul says all the time. I watch RuPaul's Drag Race, so I'm a fan. I love it. And I think I love it because I love, it's not necessarily because I love drag. I just love hearing their stories. I love seeing their creativity, and it's just amazing to see them transform, the queens transform into those female impersonators. And then some of the queens are even trans women. But RuPaul has said for a long time, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? Think about that for a second. If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? How the hell are you going to love somebody else if you don't love yourself? So let me take this back when I talk about love wins. Does love really win? The homosexual community wanted the straight community to understand that love wins. So they could win, or we could win our right to be married. But there's like a little problem with that. When we take that RuPaul saying that if you can't love yourself, do gays love each other? We as a community, we're fighting for the rights of the entire community, right? I think, maybe. I don't know. Because when I look at our gay community, I don't see any love today. In 2017, I don't see the love. I see a lot of separate, different communities within communities that have, the gay community have just separated and segregated, and they love themselves. You have the trans women, the trans men, bisexuals, pansexuals, non-gender conforming, gay men, hyper masculine gay men, DL gay men, confused gay men, lesbians, studs, and all the other kind of categories and colors of the rainbow that make up the homosexual community. I thought we were one community that said, which is why we said love wins. But it seems more and more today that we don't have love for each other. So if we don't love each other, or if we don't love ourselves, how can love win? I don't know. You know, I think that it's just difficult for me to really understand, especially when we have, like, let's say Black Lives Matter. And yes, I'm an avid supporter of Black Lives Matter, but it sickens me when people turn it around. And I just want to say that most people should understand that when people say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean other lives don't. Of course, all lives matter. The problem, however, the reason why the Black Lives slogan came up is if all lives do matter, then why are black people being killed disproportionately by the police if all lives matter? That's the reason the hashtag Black Lives Matter came about. And there's a lot of other politics that we could talk about, the different groups and people who have done different things and what have you. But the sole purpose of that movement was because what we have seen, the trend is that there is a disproportionate brutality against the black community. Doesn't that sound familiar to the gay community? Doesn't that sound just a little bit familiar? A disproportionate brutality against the black community. Think about those 4 events that I brought up. Think about Love Wins. What sickens me to my stomach is when our gay community, many people in the gay community, actually refute or pretend like they don't even understand Black Lives Matter, and they just jump across the aisle and as soon as someone says Black Lives Matter, they say all lives matter. It's like, how do you decide to not even understand? And I don't think they just don't understand. I believe they don't care. Because I believe certain groups of people, once they won their rights to do whatever it is that they wanted, that they thought they were equal, then they said to hell with everybody else. I got what I wanted. Now I'm just like everybody else. Forgetting the history of where we've come from together. This is why I had an issue with Love Wins. I had an issue with it because I felt like Love Wins was just a gimmick, and it really meant that love wins for me, for me. Forget everybody else, but for me. So what I understand is, like, if you don't have love for other people, if you don't have love for your own gay community, first of all, then how can you preach love wins? And also, if you really believe love wins, then how can you not understand the things that are going on in our society today? The brutality, disproportionate brutality against black people. People like 45 who is blatantly racist against brown people. How do you just turn your neck, turn your head, and just pretend like it doesn't happen? It's not happening. You don't empathize, you don't care. These people don't care, they don't empathize, and I just don't understand. But moving on, with that being said, going back into the reason why I actually am doing this podcast is because you notice something really interesting in the gay community today. Predominantly what you see on some dating apps, such as Jack'd, Grindr, Scruff, Adam for Adam, Men for Now, Tinder, and even sometimes on Facebook. People will blatantly say or put in their profiles, no facts, no blacks, no Fems, no Asians, no Latinos, no Mexicans, DDF, clean only, mask for mask. Ain't that some shit? After all of the events that I just talked about, we still haven't learned our lesson. We went on this entire crusade talking about love wins, and we have decided to segregate ourselves, further segregate ourselves. Because of what? What people like to say is because of preference. Preference, really? Is it really a preference? I don't know about that. I think that sometimes people do have a preference. And when you're using the context of what a preference is. But before I get into that, I just want to ask a question. Where's all this coming from? And again, I think it's coming from, in my opinion, once the LGBT community won, certain group of the LGBT community won their rights to be married, they said the hell with everybody else. Whatever, we can now separate and do our own thing. We don't need to be a group anymore. But also with these dating apps, it has created this kind of atmosphere where there's no face to face contact. You know, when there's face to face contact, there's certain things that you can say behind your computer screen that you would never say to somebody in person. Ever say to somebody in person. So now that we have these computer applications and these cell phones and these apps, we get to hide behind the screens and say what's really on our minds. This is not something you can think about that. When you meet people, are they really being authentic? Because when they go online, they go balls to the wall. I feel like that's their really authentic self. What you see in person is something different. I don't know which one's better. Do you want to see someone show their ass in public? Or is it just manners when they don't show their ass in public? Do you want to see the person or know the person you're talking to is really stabbing you in the back when you're not looking? That hates your guts? Or do you just prefer manners? I don't know. When we talk about 45 and what he's done with the politically correctness, I don't know if maybe it's not a bad thing. Because in our society for so long, we have been so politically correct and we didn't say certain things that we didn't really know what people thought. But now people are outright saying it. You know, I watch the news quite a bit, and one thing that I've seen after 45 was elected, you hear the news media anchors using curse words more often. Before 45 was elected, you didn't really hear them use much profanity. But now they do. And they are dragging people. It's really interesting. And I don't think it's that bad. I don't think that's a bad thing. I feel like there's a lack of gay community today. What happened to our community? And again, what happened to love wins? That whole slogan of love wins. I don't believe that people thought love won for everybody. That love won for everybody. I don't believe that the people who were saying that actually really believed that. I believe they thought love won for them. And of course, you have things like white privilege. White privilege. Yes, I said it, white privilege. Some people believe it, some people believe it exists, and some people don't believe it exists. And when you mention it, you know, some people want to say, why you got to pull the race card? Well, because it's a race issue. It hasn't gone away. Why not try to understand instead of getting or being on the defensive? And I feel like with that the love wins, basically a lot of the white community felt like they were equal to their heterosexual counterparts. So they said, forget everybody else. And it's interesting in the gay community because what I've noticed as a black man, that you see many Latinos that are also, they kind of piggyback off of white privilege. Asians as well, and Middle Eastern people. They kind of piggyback off of that. Because when they come here or when they're in the United States, many of them, they either date each other or they do anything possible to date white men. Why? I don't know. Even lesbians. I've seen that in the lesbian community as well. It's like they put white people on a pedestal. I don't know if white people really notice or they care or they even think about it, but that's part of white privilege. And it's hard because when you see those brown people, Latinos, Middle Eastern, Asians doing that when they're minorities themselves, it just leaves everybody, it puts us in a bad position because it still elevates white privilege. And then, of course, black people are on on the bottom of the list. Oftentimes, black people are just fetishes, we're novelties. When people do of other races want to quote unquote hook up with black people, is usually because of a fetish. Not everybody's like this, and of course not everybody's racist, and not everybody uses their white privilege for evil and things of that nature. But my experience is definitely that there has been a lot of white people, there are a lot of white people that hook up with black people as a fetish. Not because they're amazing human beings, not because they want to get to know that person, but because they want their BBC. Stereotypes. Stereotypes. And if they stereotype that, what else are they stereotyping? Think about it. If a white person, Latino, Asian, whomever, is going after a black person and they're going after them to sexualize them because of a stereotype, then what else are they stereotyping? Think about that. This is disheartening because it's like, as a black man, why do you have to always look at me as a big dick? I'm just a dick walking. That's all I am. You don't know anything about me, but you assume that my dick is 10 inches or larger. Period. Because I'm black. And I'm automatically a top, and I automatically want to dick you down, and I'm automatically dominant, and I'm automatically aggressive. Stereotypes. Think about why that is. Why? Many white guys don't have a problem with having sex with a black man. Well, that's if the black man is fucking them, of course, topping them. That the white man is on the receiving end. But as far as dating them, oh no. As far as introducing them to their friends, oh no. That's not going to happen. Where's the empathy? And then we want to say that we have these preferences. It's just a preference. Is it really a preference? So let me go back over a few things. I talked about this in the very beginning. I talked about the difference between preference, prejudice, discrimination, and racism. So I want to read this definition to you once again. Preference. Preference is a greater liking for one alternative over another. That's kind of like, you know what? I prefer a BMW over a Lexus. And I prefer BMW over a Lexus because BMW is faster. I like the quality. It's a German car. I like the style of it. But it don't mean I won't drive a Lexus. That don't mean I won't get a Lexus. It's just that I prefer the BMW over a Lexus. See, that definition, it doesn't exclude other things. Let me read it again. Preference, a greater liking for one alternative over another. See, it doesn't exclude other things. It's just an alternative. I have a greater liking for this. So I'm going on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being my most desirable car, I'm going to give BMW 5. Then I'm going to give Lexus 4. So, but if I can't get that BMW, then I still like the Lexus, so I'll go for it. Is that what your preference is? Probably not. Because when people say no femmes, no fats, no blacks, no Asians, no this, no that, DDF, mask for mask, hypermasculinity, I really hate that. You're specifically excluding people. That's not a preference. That's being prejudiced and being discriminative. Prejudice, a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. A preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. So, when I say that I have a preference for BMW and I've never even driven it, how can I really say that I want to have a BMW? Or let me put it a different way. If I say that Lexus is not as good as in BMW, but I've never even tried a Lexus, then how do I know that Lexus is not just as good as a BMW? Preconceived opinions that is not based on reason or actual experiences. Prejudice. No facts, no Fems, no blacks. DDF, no Asians, mask for mask. You've never had any of them. How do you know you don't like them? How do you know that they're not someone who would be your perfect match? How do you know that? How do you not know that? Prejudice, preconceived opinions that is not based on reason or actual experience. Discrimination, the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on groups of race, age, or sex. When you're being prejudiced against someone based on their race, age, or sex, that is discrimination. But in this context, let's say sex and age, sex and race. When you have preconceived notions that are unreasonable and you have no actual experiences of what you base your quote unquote prejudice or your preference on, and you use that to exclude a whole race of people that you have no experience with, then you're being discriminative. That's discrimination. That's not a preference. Racism. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. When you believe that your race is superior to other people's races or another person's race, so you decide to be prejudiced against them based on no rational reasoning, no actual experience, unjust treatment, exclusion based on your thinking that you are more inferior or that they are inferior to you is racism. So let me go back. When people say no facts, no Fems, no blacks, no Asians, DDF, mask for mask, is it really a preference? I don't know about that. I don't know. It seems difficult because it feels like in our community today that people hide behind that preference umbrella when they're really being prejudiced, discriminative, or racist. And they wear it like a badge of honor and say, I just have a preference. What kills me in our community too is when you call somebody out on their quote unquote preference. They like to compare it to gays not liking women and then saying, if I don't like women, am I then considered heterophobic? No, bitch. No, you're not considered heterophobic because it's not even the same thing. You're comparing apples and oranges. It's not the same. When we're talking about discrimination, when we're talking about prejudice, when we're talking about racism, no. Now, I will give somebody a little credit. When we look at the definition of discrimination, perhaps when there's unjust or prejudicial treatment against someone based on their sex, so if a male doesn't like females because they're gay, and nah, it's not it still doesn't equate. And here's the reason why it doesn't equate. Because in the definition, it says the unjust or prejudicial treatment. Unjust or prejudicial treatment. Prejudicial treatment, preconceived opinions that are not based on reason or actual experiences. The reason why when a gay man tries to say that they are being are they heterophobic because they don't like women, the reason why that's not accurate, or the reason why it doesn't really justify them being their discriminative, prejudice, or racist selves, is because it's not unjust. It's not a preconceived opinion based on unreasonable thoughts or actual experiences. And the reason is because you know you're gay. You know you're gay. We fought for this. A lot of us say that we were born that way. We just don't have these inherent feelings for another sex. Right? And I know there's going to be some naysayers out there. So you could still say that about race. You could say that about age. I don't think so. Because the reality is, racism is taught. It's not learned. Well, excuse me, it's learned. We're not born racist. We're born gay. We're not born ageist, but we're born gay. That's why they don't compare. You understand? That's why they don't compare. So the next time someone says that to you, well, if I don't like women, am I considered heterophobic? No, fool, because you're comparing apples and oranges. It's not unjust because you were born gay. You weren't born racist. Why is this happening in our community? People are using this preference to hide behind racism. They're using preference and they're putting that in the front when they're really just being racist, discriminative, and prejudiced. And no, there is no such thing as reverse racism. That's just something somebody invented. Reverse racism does not exist. I challenge you to actually, you can go on YouTube and type in reverse racism isn't real. There are so many people of different races that actually explain why racism isn't real. And if you don't care to really understand, then you just don't want to understand. Ignorance is bliss, right? You're part of the problem if you believe that. Because the reality is, in order for us to empathize with each other, we have to understand where we're coming from, which is where loved ones came from. We wanted heterosexual people to empathize with us, so we can, and we use this love, which is a universal term, to help pull at other people's heartstrings so they can really understand what it was. We wanted them to empathize, sympathize, and relate to us, but we don't do it ourselves. We don't do it ourselves. How the hell are you going to love somebody else when you don't love yourself? Think about that. How can we do better? Well, we can do better, like I said, with empathy. We need to try to understand where other folks are coming from. Instead of being defensive when someone says, I believe this is this because of X, Y, and Z. Don't be defensive. Just try to understand. God gave us one mouth and two ears for a reason. We need to judge each other based on who we are, our character, not preconceived notions about whole groups of people. Not all people of this one race or color are all the same. We are all individuals. Get to know us. Get to know each other. Learn one another. Stop sexualizing each other. When we see people, a lot of times, gay people, when we see them, all we see is a walking dick or ass or sex or I want to get on my knees and suck his dick. That's all you see. What you don't understand is that is a soul. That is a person. I believe in God. I'm not a Christian, but I do believe in God. And I believe that we were all made in the image of God. And if we were all made in the image of God, then what does that tell us? We also know that God lives within us. And if we were all made in the image of God and God lives within us, then I believe that we are God. We are God walking on earth. And when we speak to each other, we're really speaking to God because God speaks through us. So when you're talking to someone and you're treating them all bad, just remember that the energy that comes from the earth, the energy that comes from God is within us. And when you treat other people bad, you're really treating God bad. That's just my philosophy, my opinion. I know it's a little deep. I didn't want to get really religious here, but that's kind of how I believe and that's how I see it, which is why I don't really like treating people bad. Sometimes I don't talk to people because of energy. If I feel like they may treat me bad or I feel a negative source of energy coming from them, I may not say anything. One of my last suggestions is let's have meaningful connections. Think about all those hookups that you've had. Think about all those hookups that you had that you don't remember their name, that you know nothing about them. All you remember is how good or bad the sex was, how big or little their dick was, how big or juicy their ass or small their ass was, how good or nasty that ass was, how great that threesome and that orgy was. That's all you remember. You probably don't remember that. Sometimes you've had sex with so many people, you can't remember who you had sex with. Can't keep track of them anymore. Isn't that bad? I'm not judging. I had my share of rendezvous, if you will. But I've come to understand that there's a lot of misconnections because of over sexualizing each other. And there's some deeper meaning to that, and I'll get into that to another podcast. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've gone to psychiatrists and I've learned a lot of things about myself and a lot of things about each other. But I will briefly tap on that again. I'm not a doctor, but oftentimes people do that because they're lonely and they're looking for something. They want that immediate satisfaction and they get it from a hookup. Now, I don't understand people in open relationships. That's a different story and again, another podcast because I don't think that really applies to this necessarily. But for a lot of single people, when you're doing multiple hookups, I believe you're looking for something that you haven't been able to find. And the reality is, I believe you're looking for love. And again, love comes from within. And you're not going to find love if you don't love yourself. And if you're having sex with multiple people all the time, do you really love yourself? If you are saying no fats, no Fems, no blacks, no this, no that, no Asians, no DDF, mask for mask, why? Why are you doing that? Is there something about you that you don't love about yourself? Have you decided to be so exclusive within your own self that you can only be around people that look just like you? Why is that? Empathy, love. Love sees no color, but you do. Because it's a preference or is it racism? Think about it. Let's do better. Let's love ourselves so we can love others. If you like this podcast, please follow me. You can find me on DearGays on Facebook. All you have to do is go in the title or the search menu in Facebook and type in DearGays and you will see the DearGays page. Stay tuned for the DearGays.com website because there you will find this podcast along with blogs, dedicated resources for the gay community, and an advice corner. It's going to be great. Can't wait to get started. I'm looking forward to carrying on the conversation with the gay community and talk about issues that affect us. This is going to be a great ride. I will talk to you later.